Georgia O'Keeffe once said that she could say things with color that she couldn't say with words, which is great because in 2026, it feels like all my words are being auto-completed by a chatbot anyway. So, how do we find authentic expression when technology is mimicking our every move? Today, I'll be diving into a brilliant blog written by Brooke Brownlee, one of the clinicians at Modern Intimacy, about the resurgence of art therapy for trauma recovery and why, in a world full of digital noise, getting our hands dirty just might save our minds. Hi, Brooke. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Yeah.
You wrote a blog recently about art therapy and how it
Mhm.
might be the analog answer to a lot of what we're yearning for in this overly saturated digital world. So maybe
Yeah.
we can start. Can you talk a little bit about what art therapy is and what it isn't?
Yeah, art therapy is a specific type of therapy where instead of cognitive processing and talking a lot about your feelings, doing that kind of top-down approach, it's more of this bottom-up where you're being expressive, whether it's through painting, drawing, where you're putting the emotions onto paper. It's a specific form of therapy that hasn't been studied as much, but we've been using art therapy since the existence of humans. So that's how we've been telling our stories. That's how we know so much about our past, is through art. So what it's not is it's not this. I think sometimes when people think art therapy, they think it's just for children. But that's also, it's really helpful for adults in processing emotions. Art therapies for everybody.
Yeah, it is. And it's a really powerful tool. And I love that you brought in the point that a lot of folks think it's just for younger people. But
Mhm.
that's part of its power is that it bypasses all of our adult sophisticated defense
Right.
mechanisms.
Yeah.
And we've developed a lot. The older we are, the more
Hmm.
entrenched we are in keeping ourselves protected. So art therapy is one of those tools that really helps us get out of our own way in processing important emotions and other material that comes up when we're holding on to stuff from the past that hurts.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. We have so many protective layers when we become adults, just so much of our lived experience. So art therapy allows us to connect to our inner child, connect to our inner self. It's great to, if you're a perfectionist, of just getting something down and it's not going to be perfect. That's not the point. It's just the point of expression and connection to self.
I remember when I was first introduced to art therapy, I was so paranoid that my art would be
Yeah.
judged as not good enough, right? And that in and of itself is such a tender response, right, for people who
Mhm.
are worried about judgment or vulnerability. And nobody's giving out awards for art therapy. It's really about looking at the process and really being expressive and learning how to lean into that authenticity.
Absolutely. And, as someone who does art on my own for my own processing, and I'm not an artist. I've not take art. I've not done art classes. I'm not like a trained artist per se. Um, so it's been helpful for me as well to just get past my own kind of perfectionist ways to just really open my mind and be creative.
Mhm. Yeah, there's meaning in the messy.
Yeah, exactly.
Love that. Well, we were talking specifically about art therapy as a way to reclaim a sense of power after a traumatic
Mhm.
experience. I wonder if we can talk about some of the ways that art therapy can help people really get back into a sense of power and agency on their terms.
Yeah, I think a big when clients come in with trauma to therapy, a big thing that I hear often is, well, I don't want to talk about it
Mhm.
because I don't want to relive it. It's really painful to talk about. They feel like an open wound after this session. Sometimes therapy creates this safe container, and then they have to go back home. They have to go back home to their families. They have to go to work, and it's just a lot to just open that up. So art therapy is great because you're not talking about it, you're creating it. And it doesn't need to be linear in timeline. There's not questions from the therapist of when did this happen or how did it make you feel at the time, and more of like your control of the narrative and getting it out of your body and physically onto something. There's something really powerful about that, of moving that energy without having to verbally process it. It also puts the therapist and the client kind of at this equal playing field. I know sometimes it can feel as a client that the therapist is maybe like this healthcare provider that's in some holds some substance of power. But in art therapy, the therapist is just observing the process. It's not, we're not questioning it. We're just observing and helping you kind of open up and tap into that creative, expressive self that's moving the the feelings onto paper.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because sometimes when people come to therapy to address their trauma, there is this feeling of intimidation. Like, I'm going to have to remember everything, tell the person I'm working with everything. And that's not the case in any trauma healing, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's art therapy or a different modality, no one needs to relive the traumatic moments in order to heal. And art therapy does create this vehicle for the metaphor to be profoundly cathartic and for someone to not have to go into every granular retelling or reliving if that's not what they want. Some people really like that process and find it cathartic. So, art is, again, this really lovely vehicle to create, a place of equanimity in the process
Mhm.
between the therapist and the client, which is good to have anyway. But the reason art therapy is so powerful in that sense is because it really does put the person processing their trauma in the driver's seat of what is expressed and how it's expressed, which creates this beautiful witnessing moment in the therapeutic process.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you never have to, anytime you come to therapy of trauma, you never have to retell every detail and go down that path, which is a I think a common misconception. And yeah, art therapy is just another modality that really helps um not lessening the cognitive aspect, more of the bottom up approach.
Yeah. And so for folks who maybe aren't familiar with that language, a bottom up
Mhm.
approach is essentially different modalities that activate the body first and the subcortical parts of the brain without all of that sophistication of the prefrontal cortex. What does that mean? It means that emotionally and somatically, there's movement first, and then the mind makes sense of it later. And that's really important because for a lot of folks, trauma gets stored in their body and it's not really accessible through talk therapy or through linear ways of expressing oneself because those memories weren't stored in the same vein. So having a somatic approach like art therapy, again, kind of gets in and it opens up stuff to be metabolized somatically, which is brilliant.
Yeah, you said that really well. So many times I hear from people, which I'm sure you do as well, is like, I cognitively understand this. I cognitively understand how I feel, what's happened, but I don't know how to transform this. I don't know how to move this out of me. Bottom up approaches are great with that. And that's, like you said, with art therapy, you're bypassing the cognitive part and tapping into the body first. And that's just such a great way to move that energy when you just feel really stuck in the cognitive processing.
Yeah. What are some forms, what are some mediums for art therapy that people
Mhm.
might find valuable?
Yeah, you can draw, paint, dance, sing. clay. There's a really lovely art therapy project with masks of doing your outer self that you show to the world and then how you feel on the inside of the mask. I think that's such a powerful intervention. There's really no true limitation. A lot of, I'd say, traditional art therapy is just using paper and creating in that way because that's an easy material for people to have
Mhm.
with them or on them. But you really can expand on many different forms of art.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the gift of art therapy. I think it is so infinite in its possibilities. I
Mhm.
mean, you can take things that you find in your everyday life and repurpose them into something creative and meaningful. Again, that
Right.
process of metabolizing or alchemizing something from its current form into something that speaks is really
Mhm.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about art as therapy being something that historically has carried us through
Mhm.
honestly millennia, right? Since
Yeah,
even before humans had formalized language, they
right.
were painting, sculpting,
Mhm.
expressing through art. So how does art therapy potentially help people move into a space of abolition or decolonizing the process of therapy, moving it away from this Western hierarchy of work?
Yeah, you said it. We had art, dance, sculpting, painting before language. So that's how we would tell stories to many generations is through movement, is through creation. Um, and our Western sort of approach to therapy has been very cognitive based, which is great. There's a lot of evidence based around things like CBT, but things like art therapy is a great way to tap into different areas of therapy that are less cognitive based, doing something like an ancestral lineage type of art project to reconnect to your own self, to your history. Many cultures, all cultures, have their own form of art and creativity. So it's a way to tap into a different form of self that's not such a Western approach to therapy that we have.
Amazing. What is one thing you want people to know about using art as a therapeutic modality if this is their first introduction to this as a concept?
Mm, one thing is you can't do it incorrectly.
Ooh.
There's only correct. Yeah. So it's just something to tap into yourself, let yourself be vulnerable and let it flow. Like it's only good things can happen.
Thank you. Thank you for talking a little bit about art therapy. Folks, if you're watching and this feels interesting to you, you can check out Brooke's blog. It's linked down in the comments. And also, if you're looking for support, you can always schedule a consultation with Brooke or anyone else on the Modern Intimacy team.